Good afternoon, Janine Young, Energy and Water Ombudsman, New South Wales. And I stand here today actually representing my peers in the other states. We like to share the opportunity rather than all paying travel costs and all being in the room at the same time. Firstly, I'd also like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on today. I pay my respects to their elders past and present. At EWON, we do a significant amount of work in Aboriginal communities, both in metropolitan, regional, rural and remote New South Wales. We're really privileged to do that work. And I'm guessing for many of them, consumer data rights is not even considered or thought of. So it's a very interesting topic though, as we know. Am I changing these or are you changing these for me? I am? All right. Okay. First one worked, that's good, good sign. So as Gavin mentioned at the start, with new power comes great responsibility. Is the CDR just a new opportunity for things to go wrong? How do we encourage and maintain trust? And I guess my presentation is going to deal with a couple of questions, a journey, 3 risks and 1 or what could be called many dilemmas. So the first one is about CDR and how we encourage and maintain trust. And I actually posit this as a question first. How do we firstly rebuild trust? Trust in this sector is at an all-time low. I'm not sure that it's lower than anything else. And I used to work in the automotive sector for many years. But I think even used car salesmen nowadays have greater trust than what the energy sector has. So is it trust in who as well, whether it's retailers, government networks, the regulators, generators, media, Ombudsman officers, we're all at risk. So really it's right across the sector. And I say this seriously because in all the conversations I have with everyone in the sector, we all agree it's going to create a really unified approach to rebuild trust. And of course, trust in what? So you've got pricing, you've got contracts, you've got service, and I guess data is the next thing. We're not going to resolve those right now. Perhaps with great Q&A, we'll have some solutions by the end of the session. So let's look at the question though of CDR, consumer data rights, and EDR, external dispute resolution, and whose role is it? So in the EDR arena, is it the Energy Ombudsman, the South Australian Ombudsman, because after all, the Australian Energy Market Operator came about through legislation in South Australia. Perhaps it's the Commonwealth Ombudsman, if an entity who has responsibility for consumer data rights is set up under Commonwealth statute. Could it be the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner, because of course privacy is involved? Or perhaps it could be the Australian Financial Complaints Authority, which is the new sector that covers complaints about banking, finance and insurance. But perhaps not for the entire complaint, just for bits and pieces of the complaint. Now obviously we all know customers don't want to deal with multiple entities to resolve their complaints, although there might be a few that like to forum shop. So some of these dilemmas need to be fixed before actually CDR complaints start to occur. And I'm guessing if someone walked in off the street now, saw the sign and thought, oh, there's a forum there, perhaps I can sneak in and have a listen, they wouldn't even know what we're talking about. So we've really got to do some work in that space. And again, on the question of CDR and EDR, where does industry sit in this space? And what about the regulators? If either were to rely on the role of the current jurisdictional energy ombudsman schemes, all involved need to be aware that we now have entities that are providing telco and energy services, and some issues will creep into the financial services sector if they haven't already done that. And I guess where our ombudsman actually got involved in this was one of them, Jane Perez, the Energy and Water Ombudsman Queensland, got an invite to a CDR workshop in New South Wales. So she, of course, sent me an email saying, oh, are you going? Should I come too? You know, what's it about? I'm not really across this yet. And I went back to her and I said, well, that's interesting because I haven't got an invite. So, of course, then we got on to Cynthia in Victoria and then Sandy in South Australia. And we decided that Rory, my policy manager, would go on along and then share information. And that's when we started on the journey. And we found out then that COAG had a consultancy agency do some research, and they came up with the solution to complaints that might eventuate through CDR, and saying the Jurisdictional Energy Ombudsman would be able to take those complaints. So that's when we really started saying, can we, should we, could we? So we identified that our officers were named, were included, so we started talking about it. We identified the broader implications that perhaps could involve parliamentary or statutory ombudsman, and we actually got in touch with them, and they weren't across the issue from an energy perspective at that point in time, both in identifying, I guess, that they needed to be involved in the discussion, but not necessarily wanting to have any responsibility at the end of the outcome of this. We're continuing those discussions with key stakeholders, including the AER, the AEMC, and of course the ACCC, because that's where the working group is sitting, and I understand the next meeting on that is next week. And we're also beginning to explore mechanisms which could effectively resolve complaints that are spilt across jurisdictions. And these discussions really started, I remember way back when I was working at EWON as Deputy Ombudsman in about 2008, when Dodo first joined the energy sector. It had the idea of putting out a product and a single bill for both telco and energy, and it realised pretty quickly it had no way of doing that. But in the meantime, we got together with the TIO to talk about how we would split complaints or come up with terms of reference or an MOU to actually deal with them through a one-stop shop. And it's interesting that here 10 years later, 11 years later, we're having the same discussion, and it will become a reality. We have to do it. I missed changing slides. I was relying on the back. Anyway, the three key risks that I mentioned at the start is first, how do we prevent CDR creating a greater divide between customers who can opt in and the customers who would experience perhaps greater vulnerability and who could or would get left further behind. And Jared shared some further information about that. I don't know, need to go into that. One of the interesting things is that research that I got from the European Energy Ombudsman Network, they shared that the potential benefits of smart meters and digitalisation of meter data hasn't been realised in Europe. Lauren mentioned that they've been on this since about 2011, in large partly due to the lack of information for consumers about what's possible. So even though they've been having a discussion for a long time, they're still not seeing those benefits. So we're at the forefront of it. I guess, what is the role of unregulated third-party entities in this? And if I just talked about brokers, or perhaps even talked about meerkats, what do they know about you if you've used them to get a new health insurance policy, a new energy company, and perhaps a new car insurance company? They've already got a lot of data on you that they'd be using for different purposes. And what will stop regulated retailer entities having a direct competitive interest in their customers not having access to their own data and therefore better choice if they choose to engage in the market? And Jared talked about the fact that many customers, through whatever circumstances, either can't engage or don't wish to engage in an essential service, that they trust the market to look out for them. So I mentioned I had one dilemma, but it's actually a few, because obviously we all know it's not just all about data and CDR when it comes to external dispute resolution. Emerging technologies, products and services are now becoming more prevalent and will over the next couple of years. On the 11th of February, so last Monday, we had a forum in my office where the chairs and ombudsmen from Queensland, South Australia, New South Wales, Victoria, and even New Zealand came together and talked about many of these things as they're affecting us. So we're certainly looking at identifying some of the solutions and looking at what's the work we need to do to stay relevant. Behind the meter and what's happening in that space, pricing. I mean, this is a reality that's got to get addressed. We know it is in different ways. Interesting reading in the news again this morning that there's finger pointing by the government to retailers and back and forth. Data even before CDR comes in. We currently have issues about privacy and what goes wrong. And if you talk to any energy ombudsman at any point in time, affordability or billing actually make up around about 80% of all of our complaints. A lot of people who come to us about a high bill are really just saying, I can't afford the price. And then we have credit issues and disconnection. So I guess the really single dilemma out of all of that is if a consumer has an energy issue in 2023 or 2028 or 2030, it could revolve around any of these things, and they'll be saying, but do I go to the Energy Ombudsman, or does the Energy Ombudsman say, sorry, it's out of my jurisdiction? And that will go back to the trust that I talked about at the start, because if an Energy Ombudsman can't refer a consumer to get an issue resolved, or resolve it themselves, then of course consumer trust will drop. So summing up, the current EDR model proposed for EDR, Energy CDR, doesn't fit with the setup of Energy Ombudsman as we currently are. We're membership based, we need to take that into account. But that doesn't mean that we can't change. Over the last 12 months, the majority of us have opened or expanded our jurisdiction to take in exempt entities and complaints about those, so that customers living in embedded networks, large apartment blocks, retirement villages have access to dispute resolution. We need to be involved in the discussions to ensure we can be part of what's being proposed. So we're making sure we're doing that, particularly by engaging with each other and by engaging with the ACCC. More importantly, of course, we need to make sure the interests of current members of the scheme are looked after, but most importantly, that the interests of consumers are looked after. And of course, there's those other converging issues that I talked about. Bundled products, data amalgamation, all those things just create additional issues. So on that matter, I might hand back to Gavin to facilitate questions.